Okay, excellent. Thank you for the intro there, Jen. I'll just hide all the images on the side so I can see my slides. So thank you very much for your time and for the intro, and also Jen and Ian from Dairy Australia for the opportunity to present today, and welcome all those that have signed in. Okay, so I'll kick forward with essentially a very short bit about me. I mean, Jen's already covered a little bit about my background, but I look after a couple of companies. Q Design Enterprises, which is my packaging design firm, or on structural packaging predominantly, and a bit of brand work as well, and also the Pack Collective, which is the customer experience and service design part of my world, which sort of sits in quite nice when you start to see the themes that play out through the presentation about the shift from the widget to the service and to the customer experience as well. So I find that sort of go hand in hand, and that'll be shown through some of the themes as well. This is, I guess, the visual antithesis of what I do. So again, going right through from insight ideation. So looking at those themes, those trends, what links up to consumers, which is the basis of the conversation today, and leading it all the way through to manufacturing as well. And the other part, I guess the other arrow in the bow there is the customer experience, or CX as we call it, and service design. And where you see this playing out in the food and packaging industry is where you start to look at things like circular economy coming into play. So we're not focusing on a widget or an end product or an end destination. We start to map out the journey, the behaviours, and look for a self-sustaining system. And so this is that thinking methodology, which is the other part of my business. So that gives you a bit of a background as to where I come from, my thinking, and I guess the areas that we get to be involved in and also influence. So enough about me. Moving on to the actual topic at hand, and part of the first step here is looking at some of these macro impacts that we're all experiencing. We're all at home. Well, most of us are. Those are definitely in Melbourne. I think it's about probably a good half of the people dialing in today are in Melbourne. So we're all probably juggling households and places to sit. I'm on my couch at home while my kids are doing their remote schooling. They're 5.5 months in, and my wife is on medical leave at home. So we're all sort of hopping around between doors and walls at the moment. The focus here is about what these impacts are for us globally. So I think we're all pretty much well across infographics and numbers in all the daily newscasts, be it from your local premier, as we are with Dictator Dan, as some people call him, in the state of Victoria, as well as Scott Morrison doing his press conferences. But this is one that I took as a screenshot from Bloomberg, and it really gives you a bit of a running ticker, essentially, as to what's happening and the spread globally. This image is from 2 days ago. I think it's about 26.8 million on this slide, and this morning it was at 27.4. So it's around about 250,000 per day globally being added to this list, as it makes it so slow spread around the world, and in some cases coming back a second time, as we're definitely experiencing. I believe I keep hearing the news feeds that we are experiencing the worst lockdown globally here in Melbourne, although I'm sure some people in Argentina are probably going through similar situations that we are right now. But what's interesting is through this global pandemic, and Bloomberg, a global article, is a little red line to the bottom right there that highlights the impact to the Australian economy with the news, obviously, with Melbourne's lockdown. So knowing the impact it's going to have on a national level from our side. And so moving on from that, we can obviously see there's plenty of indicators that we all see in the news feeds, in the media throughout. I guess the economic damage that this lockdown does continue to have on our businesses locally. And again, it's a lovely little shot there of Burke Street, looking a bit like tumbleweeds running through. And very sparse of activity and any movement at all. But certainly the unknown aspect is really causing issues. So people constantly having to pivot. And as a designer, we're always in a situation with our clients that we always create situations of working with hypotheses and working towards iteration and constantly pivoting and changing, but doing it on a national level with many people, industries, societies, and economies that aren't really designed to pivot and move so quickly. This is where that friction is occurring. And certainly we have a whole list of unknowns, and on to the right, we have a whole list of laws and things to do and things not to do. So now we become a situation where as a society, and this is myopic, obviously, this part here to Melbourne, but certainly filtered through the nation at different levels and for different time bands, we're starting to have to deal with new normals, different ways of doing things, and also different ways of navigating, interacting with each other. And so that starts to bring in barriers to how people start to consume, behave, make decisions, and how they alter things, their needs, want ratio. So this is where the new, I guess, paradigm shift is occurring. Many of these are likely to maybe just handle the period of this transition through COVID, and that may be a 6-month or 3-year cycle, who knows? But they're going to be elements that may stick. And the question is, what will stick over that time? So these are another little infographic I've got for the newsfeed. They give a snapshot to, obviously, Australia's first recession in 30 years. I was literally finishing off my university degree when we had our last recession, around about 89, 90, thereabouts, and about to go out into the workforce. So, so for me, sort of seeing a lot of red and a lot of negative numbers or high interest rates was something that was common sight, whereas now we're probably experiencing one difference where we're in very low interest rate situations, which are there to encourage business investment. But when you have a look at the snapshot, here's a lot of numbers to take on board. What's interesting to see is that savings, that bottom left image, the savings going up, and obviously people holding on to money, and obviously those that are picking up from government grants, access to superannuation, all different areas of getting funding, that being either squirreled away or being used for other areas where people can access it. Because when you look to the right, all of the spending that we used to do when we out and about is now being really curtailed. And many of the people that are dialed in today, their products would normally be flourishing through. Some would have impacts where they're probably saving a little bit, depending if they're in food service. Those particular in food service, so I know Buller's there as well on the line. Those areas would be hit quite hard when it comes to servicing the hotels, restaurant and cafe trade, which is down 56%. And especially if you're supporting and supplying food product towards transport or airlines, for instance, you're in a real bit of a spin if you haven't been able to pivot your business model into other channels away from your core market sector. So the days of relying on having a larger single customer being tied up in a sector of 50+% or being one customer tied up 50%, those models where people can probably get away on lazy business models will be definitely turned upside down in the current day. So that ability to be nimble and see and sit back and ask what you do with your product becomes highly important, and how you get it out to the public and navigate. And the upside here, you can see people are spending more time at home. So obviously furnishing and household goods go up, and obviously ISO drinking obviously goes up. So we've got no one from Diageo today, but certainly those that actually supply that market might be feeling pretty good with the way things are tracking at the moment. And usually things like alcohol, tobacco and condoms actually go up in sales generally during a recession when you look back in history in the last 100 years. So here's a great little graph that we've picked up through McKinsey. So doing some of the research in the background on here. And it really maps out quite nicely, almost like a traffic light overlay I've put through there, what tends to happen during this pandemic. And as you can see, first up, that first channel to the far left, we can see here preparing for the crisis, we've got that regulatory measure coming through. So people now being asked to do something differently, and that panic comes in. And as we saw so much in the newsfeed in Australia about the toilet roll sagas that we're having with people buying all these things, and that panic of pantry loading that will follow through. So we had an uptake in staple purchases, Coles and Woolies particularly doing very, very well. A lot of major brands supplying there would have also been battling to meet supply. So that would have been a nice little uptick for those that are in that category. But there was that shift also occurring to moving to online, the contactability into store, reducing groups of people coming forward, now moving people from an area that may have been laggards, or people that weren't using technology that much, to now suddenly having been forced to use online technology. And especially in the Australian mindset, we've been quite slow in uptake on that online purchase methodology compared to, say, Southeast Asia, where they're quite adept, and even Middle East, quite adept at actually doing purchasing via an online method. We moved to where that navigating the crisis, again, the peak load of cases as we were seeing that sort of return here in Melbourne, closure of non-essential retail, and we're definitely experiencing that now, and the stay-at-home distancing rules that are all being applied. So suddenly the for food starts to go through, but we're now looking at some of the fresh food ingredients to come through. And it really comes down to that hygiene level starts to come into play as well. The online grocery part starts to lift, that we saw with Coles and Woolworths in particular, having to put a stop and cap on taking online orders because the rush was so hard with people wanting to stay at home and doing a very quick pivot across to a different channel to market, being online. And having worked with those retailers in the past and being involved in some of their online pursuits, it's interesting to think going back just a couple of years where they were hoping for some movement in the online category, and this actually pandemic has actually come as a method to push that along quite dramatically, which has a ripple effect all the way through. As we start to move out and come out of that crisis as well, again, we see that staggering of easing coming through. And again, the people can their pennies, that lower spending and keeping that saving and making more wiser choices on where you might put that money. You could argue some of that also had a bit of a challenge with Australia in particular, with access to super. The buy now, pay later movement has been growing the last several months as well, really taking things by storm. So there's probably some more delayed activity happening in that particular space coming down the road. And again, that cautious return to retail. So those that might be up in Queensland and WA in particular, where things have returned to some element of normality very quickly, it's very different to definitely our experiences here in Melbourne. I've got friends up in Queensland going out to lawn bowls on the weekend with the family and friends and enjoying themselves and getting photos, and that was like a distant memory for me personally, seeing that. But that's the opposing view we have in the One Nation at the moment, the way things are rolling through. And then what's the next normal? So we know we're going to pass through this. We know that it's a matter of time. So in 2 years' time, this may have been part of the historical annuals, and we start to ask what will stick. So at the moment, we are feeling that the increased productivity is still there. People making choices to what they're doing. So the value play becomes top of concern for people when they're looking at product. Obviously, that digital engagement, we know at the peak, people are forced to go towards there. The question is, how much would that be sticking? And chatting through various people as well, we feel it will come down off the top, but not that much. So if we feel that will now be more of an established throughput, and therefore those that have moved towards that area or thinking about going to that area, be worthwhile considering a digital method of access and communication to your particular audience. And obviously, because of the increase of hygiene and so on, that attention on wellness and hygiene is obviously critical. We've got the obvious things like sanitizers and cleaning aids, but also about that inner wellness, about how you take care of yourself during ISO stages and what's good for the body become, again, high to the fore. Just observing the choices my own children make at the table now, a lot more attuned to what they're putting in their body than it was in the past before lockdown. So those sort of things become more important and top of mind. So call outs on pack about that health and well-being for inner health become a lot more important in that level. We spoke about nesting at home as well, and again, that cocooning. And certainly you can see that an uptake with platforms like Kogan and Temple and Webster and so on, really going through. Harvey Norman, look at their share prices as an example, going through the roof. And that's mainly because people now have gone online, have other methods of bringing things forward, and realistically, they're spending more time at home. So when you spend more time at home, you see more things that you're not happy with, you want to go ahead and change them. So they're diverting dollars across from one thing to the other, with then challenges about where they spend their money. So if you're selling products that might be in a premium area, how do you now speak to a different audience where their needs and wants have now altered, where wellness for themselves, increased price sensitivity is now coming in as another four, but also spending a lot more time at home. So maybe doing in-house meals and thinking more about the provenance and the quality of the food they're actually preparing themselves becomes something which is a bit more important. And that redefinition of brand purpose, again, we've got a few examples of that down through this presentation, but really understanding about what your brand stands for. Some are doing overtly, and others really are still sort of lagging behind an old world mentality when people are looking for a bit of support, trust and security. So I start to rely a bit more on brands helping them navigate that way forward. So it really starts to understand about what your brand really means. So there's some elements of what we feel may stick, and again, looking at some of these reports that come forward. And again, this presentation cuts on a couple of other sources as well, not just from one, to see what is the common truth as we go forward. And that ripple effect, and again, you can see the points through there, talking about the impact, obviously with the huge damage that's been caused in travel, in people getting around, and that will probably be in enduring situations when we start to have things lifted, as we see in WA and Queensland, where life is predominantly predominantly getting back to some element of normality, the travel bans and restrictions still are at play. So travel is only local, and as far as our ability to go overseas and involve areas will have an impact on food service sector, because the influx of tourists are obviously going to be a long period of time before that comes back to what we even class as normal levels. And also that consolidation of retailers coming forward, and those value retailers really now coming to the fore, people making choices on cost as a driver rather than just being a brand label in particular. And obviously those that stand to win, again, the likes of Amazon, where they've had quite an established e-grocery method. And again, the good thing we've probably seen in Australia is that we've had a stress test for the online delivery services, especially with the major retailers, and they would have learned a fair bit from that peak of that area. So that can only deliver a better service to us as customers down the track, and how you as a brand work with those retailers or potentially go direct to consumer as a DTC model becomes something worth discussing at board level. So continuing on, again, sourcing to see, getting a sense of where things are happening overseas as well. Ian Hayes is one who's been around the industry and the packaging industry for about 20, 30 years in this country. He was being based until recently in the UK at GSK, only recently returning back to Melbourne in lockdown again. And these are some of his views and points he picked up as well, which tend to validate what we've seen in the McKinsey report. So again, that shop to loyalty, where people now are trying a new shopping behaviour. So again, the way they engage with the brand has been changed. So the reality is, though, is that will likely continue after the crisis as well. Again, validating that need for hygiene and transparency. So again, when we talk about low touch activities here, we're talking about things that don't engage direct contact with things. So we've had an anti-plastic push towards the produce sector in particular in the last 12, 18 months in Australia. So suddenly when you're thinking about certain products that require a lot of hand touching and holding, do you want to grab something that someone's been touching from a hygiene perspective? So now how does the packaged plastic item look in your eyes versus something like that? So choosing things that involve less direct engagement with me are now going up higher the list on the criteria of selection. That simplicity, getting back to basics. So again, that the pressure on wages, that job security, the fear of the unknown, the constant changing of gears and going one step forward and two steps back starts to put a veil of uncertainty across everyone's decision-making process. So it becomes clear in a lot of people's minds about what clearly sits in a need bucket versus the want bucket as well. And again, as we saw in that first global map, some regions are at different elevated levels of concern with that areas, whereas others are now going back to some level of normality. But again, that methodology of, I guess, that ration thinking mentality. And I know, being raised by my grandmother, who was a World War II veteran to some regard, that sort of poverty and ration mindset was brought to me at a young age. And so those sort of things start to resonate over a period of time. And again, I see it with my children making different choices based on basic values rather than not really having as a concern. So that recession mentality is now starting to have its early stages of kicking in. So what does that do with people who want to start having a choice of buying particular brands on shelf? And how do you change your language on pack or your communication support to appeal to someone who has that particular change mindset? And again, the validation, again, that homebody economy. And we've actually seen a lot of this back in 2008. So when we actually had that cocooning term that had played out as well. So during that time, people were spending a lot more time, obviously saving money and not wanting to travel and go out. So they were sort of, cocooning at home and spending more time insular and inward thinking. So this has certainly been one that has been prevalent, especially in North America in particular. So this is a validation to some of the findings that we're seeing in reports, some observations from the UK in this particular case as well. And here's another one here from Deloitte, looking at some of the themes that they're actually looking and have actually noticed as well in the industry. And you'll notice on a lot of these slides as well, which most you'll have the deck, I do have hyperlinks down below. So the detail of these reports are actually via those hyperlinks. So I'm just picking out some elements that I can share with you today. Feel free to go through on these points, dig deeper and review and take your own points from it as well. But certainly there's 4 little areas here that came up. Again, validating what we've just covered through, that focus and link between food and health and the importance of actually having an inner health. We know in Southeast Asia in particular, that's quite a strong driver and buying products on the basis of what it does for me on the inside rather than anything else, and even on the outwardly side of things. That continued engagement with digital as a method of purchase and running through as well from the e-commerce piece. And obviously with the fragility of the supply chain, we've already seen with the fact that we're relying on global supply and being challenged in so many areas, many of them actually sort of start to fall down. I know myself, a few of my customers that were getting supply from overseas manufacturers for various packaging products. They were struggling to get access to cardboard, to liners, to labels, and what used to be a 6-week lead time now became an 18-week lead time, causing short supply for retailers as well during an uptake, during a panic and surge buy. So there's a lot of small-scale suppliers in the middle of that chain. We're now suddenly being exposed and left without any recourse whatsoever. And that, obviously, that break in that chain then leading towards issues with food insecurity. So these are all little themes that you start to see overlay. You see it coming from 3 or 4 or 5 different sources. That starts to set the common truth. And you look to see where you sit along that line and the impact it has your particular business. So again, what that's brought forward is the importance of transparency. And knowing that if you have one link in the chain that's broken, and a pandemic has proven that everything can actually fall down and collapse. So if there's ever been a time to have commercial transparency about your supply chain, the COVID-19 pandemic has been the one part to actually highlight that particular point. This slide here and that link that I've given in the previous slide for Deloitte, it actually has a bit more detail about this particular graph. But what I find quite interesting here is that sort of second paragraph where they do talk about building resilience in your supply chain. So again, one of the things that we've already seen is that breakdown. So if you look at your own supply chain, be it local based or one that influenced with something coming through from overseas, understanding what is your backup option. So if you do have something that is relying on an area that may not have gone through a severe lockdown, as maybe some parts of regions have, but maybe heading towards one or has already experienced it, what has that shown you in regards to response, the threat to your own business, what you have in your own background with regards to your risk mitigation program, and saying, what do I have as a second or third tier supplier that is readily available to swap over that particular person's role in this supply chain? Because in the end, your whole business is at risk if that does break down. And the lovely graph on the left here actually starts to break down those 4 quadrants as well. And you can see the bottom right, again, that area of rise of isolation. And we can see that certainly in the American politics over the last couple of years, where it is very much about pro-local support, but then making sure that you do build the infrastructure and that it can be self-sustaining. But then versus that, which is up the top right, was then looking for that regulated harmony, where things are transparent, was a combination of private enterprise as well as government bodies working together and making sure that you've got quite a robust system in place. So if anything, this has been brought forward as an opportunity for you to review your own supply chain and identify where those links or potential broken links might be and what the damage that could cause to your business all the way forward. So it's quite a nice little article. I recommend you guys to read a bit further on towards that. So let's look at some of these changes in detail. I'm sort of aware of the time as well as we go through. I won't go through all this explicitly because the great thing is that I sort of wrote this point up and I'm finding evidence I'm going through that supports it. So we've already spoken about the damage to or the disruption in supply chain. And obviously looking for local options. There's been definitely a drive towards having local supplies and thinking more about supporting the manufacturing cell. Certainly that discussion piece was quite vocal back around late March, early April nationally about definitely building up and reinvesting back into our manufacturing cell and understanding how we can re-employ people that may have been displaced in jobs that may take 2 or 3 years to actually recover, asking yourself what their skill set is and they had in their previous roles and how they might add value to a whole different local supplier or local option as well. We've spoken already a bit about the retail experiences moving online. We really believe that that's one here to stay. So you ask yourself how your brain actually engages through that platform. Do you currently have a channel to market to consumers to purchase your product online? How do you communicate with them on that way? And then beyond just purchasing, how do you engage your brand in an online platform through various other social channels that might target and reach your particular demographic? So that's, again, it's not just about a purchase play, but the way that you engage your audience, because all your other symbiotic methods of engagement with the consumer through walking the aisles or going through a large big box retailer are no longer present. So how do you keep your brand in their face? And that is that digital aspect that has a play. There has been a bit of a threat, obviously, about that push to disposable from reusable. I've got a couple of examples down the track on that. Probably could argue that's been a bit of a knee-jerk reaction in some areas. We had a good movement building up momentum about single-use plastics, which is the suck, and that was really coming down to a bit of a grafting halt at one point. But we can see rays of hope with that running forward, and maybe one or two streams of that might be challenged in the post-COVID world as well going forward. And again, with that supply chain, you know, people wanting to know and believing that where they're getting their product is safe and being delivered. I found it quite interesting. I was having a few of my clients who actually were based in Wuhan were trying to sell me facial masks after they came out of their worst lockdown, and we were experiencing ours for about, I think it was about 20 cents US a mask. So for me to try and, you know, even consider selling masks coming from Wuhan would quite be an interesting sell in itself, but you can understand the perceptions that come at play about what your supply chain looks like and where things are coming about. So traceability and authenticating where it's coming from, if anything, has been around for a few years already in different forms. But again, the need of where it sits in one's priority and thinking has been definitely elevated during the COVID-19 crisis. And again, one would expect when the froth all settles down over the next 2-3 years at the end of this, that would come down, but one would think that it's been elevated already substantially from where it sits currently. The rise of circularity and sustainability. So again, this has been a constant flow and development over the last number of years, and especially circular discussions as well. From my side of where I work, probably half the briefs that I get in the last 18 months have been around a circularity conversation or sustainability piece. But the key thing here is knowing that it's moving beyond the widget, beyond the product, beyond the pack, but moving more around that system and that collaborative model as well. And I'm finding, if anything, the COVID-19 has shown that the strength and benefit of working and collaborating together and having that sense of community that has been fractured and challenged. So my belief anyway, purely my opinion, is that it will support the growth of a circular model because it does rely on trust, on parties working together and collaborating. So if anything, I'm hoping it would actually fast forward the development of circularity from this as a pandemic shift. And then we've already touched on that brand with purpose. And again, the main reason why is that I guess what we thought was true or what we feel that we can believe and trust has been questioned or debunked. You know, so much elements coming in predominantly from North America about growing conspiracy theories taking lead, fake news, division through Black Lives Matters uprising as well, and challenging a lot of legacy brands in the food and beverage sector globally about what they call themselves and do you realise the history behind this, and people not questioning that over time, but now having to go back and think about how does this name or how does my position, how does this reflect the brand values that we talk about on our mission statement, that we tell people this is what our brand is about, but my brand name or the way I position or colours or the way that our tone of voice doesn't support that. So it's almost going back and doing audit of your brand value and making sure that the brands you put on shelf are aligned to a very stable, sound structure and purpose. And those values are actually well communicated and articulated, not only on pack now, but also in these online channels. So it does bring in a layer of complexity, but it's also a great opportunity for people to go back and audit and maybe just question a few things and go back from, again, those foundations and build further from it. So a lot of points, a lot of notes through there. But the interesting thing is that going through 4 or 5 different channels, we're finding a lot of triangulation through this, which validates and highlights what are the common truths. And it's a bit of a collection of things that have different scales, different levels of priority, but certainly showing that they are a common impact that has spun out of the COVID-19 genre. So moving forward, here we go. So this one here is a great little comment here from Instacart and really highlight a couple of key points here is that the way people put food on their table has changed, and obviously they have to sit back and redesign their products and systems. So going back about auditing your own brand, your own product, your own packaging, and maybe asking yourself from a different lens, you know, is this the right structure? What can we do differently going forward in this new world? And this is obviously dealing with a 500% increase in a year through Instacart is a hell of an impact, and that's been mainly obviously from the spike. So we look at retailers, particularly supermarkets. I've focused here on Foodstuff NZ in New Zealand, mainly because they went to probably the most severe lockdown globally before anyone else, and I think they were shut down for around about 12 weeks at a stage 4 that we're experiencing here, actually probably even more severe than we're experiencing in Melbourne right now. So they had this happen pretty much overnight, and they had to pivot pretty quickly. On this slide, I do have a link at the very bottom under that infographic to the right. And there's I think about a 10-minute video there from the CEO from Foodstuff North Island, and talking a bit about how they pivoted and pressure they went forward. So I do recommend listening to that video and picking up some other insights as well. But as you can see here, they really had to pivot quite quickly. They realised they became the primary source of food. It wasn't just takeaway, people going out to eat. People wanted fresh product coming in or prepared meals coming in, and that's where they set up their business to supply it. So it's really interesting to see what they did. They mobilised a student army to deliver to those that were outliers and marginalised, particular older folk, ones that were vulnerable, that weren't used to online. They are the laggards, they ones that won't come across to that online format. We think millennials when we think online, but now we've got people that are, you know, I'm 50 in a couple of months, so my age, I've been pretty tech savvy, but I know many that are my age that are not tech savvy at all. So a whole new cohort are coming on board. How do you keep those guys engaged and stuck and to that particular platform? So they have to go ahead and actually help navigate people through the one-way lanes, virtual queues as well, and also the guides, the new ways of doing business. A little infographic to the right, they're all become very common with. That starts to be ingrained into the way that you do things, new rituals, new behaviours that you start to learn going forward. And again, in the bottom left, I've really covered those points a lot, but probably the one key one that stood out for me was staying in your bubble. And that really had an impact for over-the-counter service. So thinking about delis, I know Coles and Woolworths starting to close some of their delis down. That's more of a cost-saving requirement, but then there's that health component about that low-touch engagement. So if I've got someone who's handling something in the back 2 or 3 times, packing it in and giving it to me versus one that's already pre-packaged, well, what would you go for in this mindset? So pre-packaged starts to come forward as a better method of choice. So that staying in the bubble and having that visibility was one big takeout that I was getting from the guys over in New Zealand in particular. Takeout becomes grocery in. So again, you know, people rely on the Uber Eats, Deliveroos and so on coming forward, but people actually going off and ordering raw ingredients to kick it home. And the main reason why was that they actually knew exactly what they were cooking with. So it was something that was prepared in the kitchen that may have had questionable hygiene levels, or depending on where it was actually, you know, in an area that had a high level of cases. Now, I'd rather go off and get my raw ingredients. I've got time, I'm at home, I'm going to prepare it myself, which then leads beautifully again back to that focus on inner wellness and inner health. So I can make wiser choices about my own health, and I know exactly what I'm doing. So that was a huge increase from that side, that complete swap around. And that obviously then leads to the contactless delivery options, which we've all experienced nationally in various levels as well. And that is something that only tends to continue as it then brings people again towards an online method of communication and dealing, and force people to actually move towards that platform if they chose not to use that in the past. And once they've moved to that platform, you'll find historically, they're not going to regress and go back. So you've got a whole new audience that have come on board, have learnt through a pandemic, has been forced to by regulation, and they're more likely to actually stick and continue going forward. So the fear about online is probably nowhere near as it was 12 months ago. And with that, again, we spoke about the cocooning people at home. I've got my gate in my front openly basically every single day, with the kids ordering bits and pieces coming through, or my wife ordering bits and pieces coming in. So e-commerce packaging waste has gone through the roof. And these numbers, scarily enough, are pre-COVID. They're December 2019. So when you start to think about it, this is only probably double, tripled, depending on what part of the world in particular. So, you know, companies like Alibaba, for example, Amazon, Dell, these sort of guys as well, they've all gone forward to start to put strict packaging regimes in place, in particular, to look at taking the waste out. I know certainly in areas like California, going back even 12 months ago, they had a huge problem with the amount of increase of e-commerce elements coming forward, and they had to sit down and actually start looking to ban a number of materials that went in line with this banning the single-use plastics as well through California, which mimicked what was happening around nationally in Australia as well. So a lot of focus on e-commerce packaging waste and the impact on there as well. The paranoia, changing behaviours and rituals. One example here, there were a number of, but KFC was one that stood out for me. Suspending their iconic finger-licking good campaign. And I find myself, and I spoke to Jen about this as well, when I go across to the shop, I used to have to lick my fingers in order to open the produce bag to put my fresh produce in. If I can't open that bag, I just put the naked one in and don't even try even thinking about licking my fingers. Same with reading newspaper. So you start to stop and you think, I've now got this changed behaviour. On the other side, you've got that fear and misinformation campaign. There was this video going around that I have a link of one actually just at the bottom, because everyone became an expert apparently overnight on YouTube about what to do with your vegetables. And it was an image there of, I think she was a Russian lady in America who was showing how you actually put a bit of a morning fresh into a hot soapy water, and you wash your cucumbers and your apples and your fruits and so on through there with her gloves on, and rinsing. So again, this misinformation running through was causing a huge amount of problem through people and making decisions. So again, the misinformation, the lack of truth, hence you come back to things about authenticity, traceability becomes quite important. How do I validate that what you're telling me is actually truth? What do I look for in that truth? And what do you do as a brand to give me confidence that what I'm buying from you is actually setting me in the right path? So these are some of the things that spin off from these outliers and, I guess, elevated areas of normality. So some case studies here. And again, all of these case studies coming forward in the presentation that Jen will forward through to you. They're all hyperlinked. They've got some more deeper dive on every single one example. And that way you can peruse at your own time. And essentially pick which ones you feel can be more relevant to your own business. So looking forward here, looking at some of these emerging tech trends, obviously it looks at all the different areas of supply chain. It's not just about the package in this particular case. Here, for instance, it's not about this, it's about everything that goes to that supply chain. So on the left are some examples that really have been driven and evidence over time that have been growing in the CPG area. So your blockchain, automation, artificial intelligence, interactive packaging, augmented virtual reality. Now, I know some of the brands that dialed in today have actually played with some of these, some outwardly, some testing in other markets in Southeast Asia, not so much locally. What's interesting, you look at on the left, which is what the trends have grown globally in the CPG sector. On the right, this is actually just from yesterday. This is an ASX, so the Australian Stock Exchange Small Cap Conference, which is still running today as well, picking the next themes for investors over the next 10 years. And obviously tech has played a huge role and growing role in the Australian sector in particular. What I find interesting though is the alignment of some of these trends and themes that they're putting forward as high growth opportunities for small caps, and how they're nicely aligned to these trends that have been around for probably 2 or 3 years, but now getting momentum. And therefore they're getting some validation in them actually being a trend and not a fad. And this is really, again, another way of validating that there's some meat in these bones, which for as a brand here in Australia, to consider thinking about investing that are relevant to your market, your channel, your cohort, and your brand. So blockchain is one that I believe Dairy Australia have actually done a presentation on separately in the past. But again, the key element about the blockchain is obviously making sure that you've got transparency and traceability through the supply chain. And the goal of that is obviously inwardly, it'd be one about validation and making sure that you've got good control and provenance of what's running forward. But from a consumer's point of view, it's about that authenticity and validation and trust building up. And I guess you as a brand is a great chance to actually capture insights as well. So I've put a couple of case studies here, and I've done my best as well to try and pick ones that relate to things that could be dairy related. It can be hard for some of these because some are very much in fashion or consumer electronics or retail predominantly, and trying to drill down to food and beverage as well as dairy can be a little bit of a challenge in some areas. But on the left, there's one based in the Netherlands here where it talks about an ethical play. So again, in an area where it has so much issues with provenance and sourcing and slave trading, wanting to make sure that, again, their brand platform is about being ethical, is about sustainable. So that's their brand value, their brand with purpose, and they support that by investing in blockchain. And that then shows to their customers and consumers the transparency and the advocacy they've got for their ethical platform. So again, if you're a brand that has purpose and feel that is an important aspect of what you want to engage your consumers to maybe validate your cohort or validate your value or premium positioning, this becomes a methodology of consideration. And on the right here, again, similar method that Nestle have done as well, using a different software partner in this particular case. But again, it allows customers to have full disclosure of its milk and palm oil supply chain. So again, when people want to go and have sniper at a brand based on what a news media or an overall theme might be happening globally without doing the due diligence, this is an opportunity for a brand to defend itself and make sure it is doing the right thing, but also communicating that to their audience as well. Augmented reality and artificial intelligence, I've got a couple covered through here as well. So again, AR has been seen as a playful marketing, PR, short-term aspect, and in some cases it can be, but also if you're trying to get reach and stretch and build a storytelling moment with your cohort, it's a really good tool to start to engage at a low-cost entry predominantly as well. So again, in this case here, I've used an example from New York, the Angry Orchids, which is a cider and food app development they've actually done, and they're looking at basically pairing. So again, how do you actually pair up food in your drink as well? So it allows you to become an aficionado of their product. It allows you to deep dive into their brand, and it gives you a chance to be educated. So it's really building about immersion into your brand, into the value, and everyone likes being the smarter one in the room, essentially, and giving a chance for your cohort to actually get a sense of your product, tell the story, talk about the heritage, talk about the provenance, but then have that journey which allows them to bring in other parties. That starts to build a stronger bond with that particular brand. So AR is used in that particular instance to build that bond with their audience. On the right, we've got an example of AI. And here at PepsiCo, we work with a company called Go Spot Check, where this is more about merchandising and shopper marketing. So here to develop this piece of software, where basically a food associate can go out, take a photo of the store shelves. That app actually uses the technology to actually identify all the SKUs in the photo, and it basically allows them to mix up their product mix on shelf. So again, if you think about if you've got a national brand in particular, you'll have different demographics, different areas of the market that would be bigger buyers of your product. But understanding your product mix on shelf may change based on those regions. Having done work for Diageo in the years, I know Bundaberg rum is an example. 80% of that is consumed and drunk out of Townsville. Even though it's one of the larger brands nationally, 80% is saturated in one particular area. So how would they do their product mix in, say, Queensland versus in other parts down in Victoria, where the old Dark and Stormy brand, for instance, doesn't sell so much down here, but Dark and Stormy's got really good, strong provenance on shelf throughout north part of Queensland. So again, using this tool and technology to mobilise your force, get insights back to your company quicker to allow you to make further and quicker changes as well. Interactive packaging. So again, this is getting that engagement with consumers back onto the pack itself. Here's an example and a link here through for Danone. And again, using Spotify. So again, you know what demographic they're trying to target. You're having a curated playlist. So this is more of that enjoyable part that gives you a moment that bounces just off pack itself. So again, quite easy tools to engage. And again, I know a couple of brands that have called in today have used this in the past in different parts of the world as well. Very, very popular in parts of Southeast Asia. Flexible fulfillment, it's a great little one here. This is a Canadian startup. And so we talked about the challenges of getting people to the stores. In this particular case, it's actually taking the store to the people. So you think about an oversized Mr. Whippy van, but this time it's actually, coated in health and wellness products and staple items that are coming through the streets. So this is a really good novel way to actually start to take things out, playing off that share service, but really bringing things to the consumers when they need it very quickly and conveniently. And what you can really find here, you could almost have another play, and you start throwing machine learning and AI, you could almost imagine that as it starts to pick up this journey over time, they can start to pinpoint on data and analytics what things are mostly purchases in regions and suburbs, and actually start to allocate certain trucks and loads based on those buying behaviours. So again, like most things involving AI and technology and data, that time bank and accumulation of data and analytics starts to give you a nice heat map, and you start to get really good, strong information to start really targeting your product, your type of eat, and the mix and loads you've got for your product SKUs in those particular areas. So really smart, interesting idea. I'm quite keen to see how this can go over time as well. Direct to customer. Now, this is obviously one that has been growing, especially in North America in particular. And someone the size of PepsiCo can certainly play this, where they've got their brand in 94% of pantries across the US. But what they did is basically they moved across and realised they had a real bottleneck with their supply chain being challenged through the marketplace. They've moved forward and obviously gone off and created their own direct-to-market or direct-to-consumer methodology here. So their own platform, their own pantry, so all their own products, and people can customise and buy either individually or as pantry kits as well. And actually having an ethical play on there where you can actually forward on, and when they're purchasing a certain amount, they can donate and pass forward items as well. But direct to customers in another area which is growing quite highly, especially North America, and even now seeing evidence in parts of Europe. The optimised convenience, so again, going for that mobile first retail. For those that are familiar in Melbourne, Skip was actually designed and developed here in Melbourne, one of the first ones to pick that up, and mainly around coffee. So again, that pre-order. So you know you're going to be going through a certain path, you can go on to your app, you can start to put in what you want to order, you've locked the order in, and essentially once you arrive to that designated pickup area, you can go off and pick up your order. So no more waiting or actually mingling in a certain space. You can just basically go in there to pick up and keep going. But having it changed now from where I'm at home and someone delivering it to me, this is me on the go and actually knowing where these hubs are and actually just calling ahead, knowing where my path is going to be, and then having it as a pickup spot as well. So that's one starting to grow, and some of the major brands, Starbucks is actually testing this at the moment in North America as an example to expand that even further. So obviously one of the other big things that we're concerned about here with this COVID change is what that does to plastic use restrictions, the impact. Where does that sit with sustainability on the short term and long term? And where does that take that disposables to reusables? And certainly, definitely across the market, here's some snippets from various news articles in March and April in particular, where a lot of the reusable options were actually banned, stopped. Starbucks, McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, nearly every single cafe in Melbourne were all basically putting a ban on bring your own coffee cups, and mainly about that consideration about sanitisation. So if anything, it's given a good chance to pause about that and maybe question where it's at, but also knowing that there's still a concern with hygiene, but then if you start to look about the reusables, the way things are sanitised become a high concern, and that secondary use as well has come into play. So the question was, will that go back? We are finding some reusables are now coming back into the marketplace, and the disposables thankfully starting to pull back a bit, because the last thing I want to do is have a reason to go back into single-use plastics in particular. But what will be interesting to see what does happen is this shift and growing shift from single-use to refillable. Now, it's been sitting as an outlier for the last 4 or 5 years. Many boutique brands with purpose have sort of activated and really just, 1 or 2 store locations. When you got Marks and Spencer and Nestle starting to make big investments and plays in this area, and having global goals not even have disposable packaging, but go towards refillable as a model in 5 years' time, it's now gone to a whole different level. So in the short term, we feel this may still have a bit of a concern from a COVID mindset, but then it comes down to really stress testing this model out. So the one on the right in particular, meanwhile, there is a link there as well. They actually have a complete integrated system. So they actually try and control the issue they have with the old style traditional bulk bins, which was, like, imagine refillable version 1. This is now version 2, and it's a lot more refined. You've got a lot more control about sanitisation, reuse models. So now it's actually now elevating those concerns, or taking those, alleviating some of those concerns over time. So with the backers of Nestle in particular, we can see this refillable movement actually growing. So you look at your own brand, thinking how would that work in this refillable model, from not only from a food service point of view, but also considering about in trade and in consumer guidance. So maybe a combination of this on the back of a truck like the grocer going around, which enables people to actually refill items as they go forward. So again, this is one that is being challenged right now. It will come back, and the likes of Nestle backing it going forward is one evidence that would actually have some links going ahead. Revolutionary recyclability. So again, we've seen some good examples of this coming forward about taking non-packaged recycled materials into recycled items. Colgate Palmolive, 5-year venture development through there, a bit of push and shove from the Blue Planet movement in Europe in particular, have now gone to actually make a single polymer-based material for their tubes and simplifying their on-pack graphic. And on the right here, we can see Pulpec, which is a joint venture from a number of major brands and led by Diageo. PepsiCo's involved as well, looking to create the world's first ever 100% plastic-free paper-based bottle. And that's actually going on shelf in 2021. And feedback from guys that are actually in the background on this is that from ones, I think the paper bottle for Carlsberg was around a couple of years ago as well. This appears to be the one that is probably delivering the best result in this shift in this format with what they're doing in the layer that controls the moisture control on the inside. So one to watch in the next year in particular. And now preparing that recycling to assist circular economy. So again, tracking and traceability is key. The Holy Grail is a new initiative being launched by Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and moving beyond the ARO, which we have in this country, about giving consumers indicators on pack. This is actually putting the smarts back into the actual pack, be it via chemical traces on the left, which the Next Tech, for instance, have done, especially for black polymers as traces and pigments, versus digital watermarks that are on pack as well. So all the information we put on ARL, or even more information than that, is actually now picked up, scanned by the technology. So this is a collective global movement under the Holy Grail, which is actually looking to actually have this another way to improve the quality of recycle it from the correct stream to be captured, quarantined and triaged to assist the circular economy. Which is a great segue into this towards the end of the presentation, talking again about the value of moving from disposable item to reusable pack. This is a great little claim here from Loop about how many packs it does take to make that shift and across. And as we know, when it comes to circularity, Loop and its partner with Woolworths locally, so they are going forward in 2021, if not earlier, depending on how things play out, with the Loop model in Australia. It has been launched in Paris, London and New York already, and this is the first place in Australia, and there is plans to roll this out in New Zealand in mid-2021 as well. But again, it's basically the old milkman idea. I'm certain most of the people that are on the call are well aware of this, where basically, again, you have reusable stainless steel packaging, high value item, you use the contained products, put it back in the tote, and that's picked up and removed with new product coming in. And obviously the whole idea here is bringing the value of design back up in this reuse model and talking about retention, that desirable ability into the packaging itself, which is an industrial design, is the reason why I'm in the industry, is really adding that as an asset, not seeing as a throwaway item. But the key point here, two key points. The design here is really made for 30 times use of that product. So really designed to not just be 1 or 2 or 3 times, but 30 times before it's recycled, and it only goes back into the actual original project, which does make it truly circular. It's like going back as something else. If it's a bottle, it'll go back as a bottle. And that's the key element of circularity. From a business model point of view, you've got this slide already, so I won't spend too much time on it. But the key thing here, especially in Australia, we're very focused on cost of things. So packaging cost on the left is about 10 cents. If you were to come in and say your pack's going to cost $3, you would fall off your chair, rightly. But when you start thinking about the return rate and the usability, if you prolong the life of that product 100 times, that pack is now only really costing you 3 cents, not 10. So you think about the infrastructure and support and having something designed for durability and longevity, it takes away having to pick a maybe less desirable material that's going to be recyclable to one which is fit for purpose, that is durable. So the recyclability of it becomes less of a concern when you're talking about keeping the system and having a way for it to come back and being used again and locking the value of that material through there. So that paradigm shift is really critical to get your head around on that side. And just finishing off in the last couple of slides now, just aware of the time, we start to think about how brands have pivoted. Obviously with this change, the channel's been challenged, the way you communicate to the market's been challenged as well, and you're being challenged about what you're doing for me. And so there's a report here through the Alderman Trust Barometer from New York. So again, consumers are really expecting brands to help during this pandemic. And if it means you lose money, that's your problem. But we don't, they'll remember those particular brands. So these are quite high numbers, 90%, 89%, 1%. They're quite high from 12,000 international respondents, not just locals in New York. This is across the world. So talking about how brands should work in coordination with government and relief agencies, brands that should make products directly help the current COVID crisis in particular, and also those brands that, looking at ones that believe companies should prioritise people over profits in particular. I've got an example there, which is obviously tomorrow's Are You OK Day, and one that Dare from Lion Dairy Drinks has put on shelf, which I thought was great to see, and I'll share that with a few friends as well. So again, taking that social narrative on play, that's an easy in on that. ones that are more engaged and ones that have pivoted the manufacturing side. So on the right here are some examples of where retailers and brands have really struggled to meet their normal supply, but they've pivoted. Louis Vuitton have gone off and they've moved making perfumes to sanitizers in 1 week. Nike's gone off and repurposed elements of their sneakers, the base sole, and used it to make face shields for frontline staff members. And Dyson gone off and gone ahead and actually produced portable ventilators in 1 week to be used in hospital care. And from a dairy lens as well, on the left here is a great little example of a company over in the US where they've gone off and they've used waste from dairy. So again, the whey permeate, the whey acid, all these byproducts, and use it to go off and make hand sanitizers as well. And done it in a partnership with Chobani and Oralis through there. And you know, here's some examples here just in Australia as well, looking at some of the distilleries. So again, all gone across Brookies. Mr. Black, I have a bottle of that sitting right here, moving across the same bottle, different label, making hand sanitizer, and Archie Rose as well. So some really good pivoting, asking what they do really well, what infrastructure they have, and how can they pivot and change based on the situation at hand. Okay, so the last slide. And this is really just one on packaging focus. And again, I do have a link on this in a bit more detail. But these are really just 7 consumer trends that are looking at driving some of these packaging decisions. And again, we've actually covered a lot of these already. And this is the great thing. You'll see the human behavior, the trends that are driven by COVID, ones that were emerging that have probably been elevated and pushed more forward because of the pandemic. They've actually now got that probably 10 years worth of growth done in 1 year because of the pandemic. And others that have been around and now starting to find a home because people's needs with regards to experiences and that subscription convenience, which has been more of a one for the lead users, but now it's becoming a standard norm. So all these areas here are ones that have been fortified, if anything, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that brings me right to the end. I think about 4 minutes left, Jen. So
yeah, fantastic. Gee, you beat through that. You've got so much to offer. I'm sure we could spend another 2 or 3 hours listening to you, Michael.
And I've just seen this note from Karen about hearing me. So I had everything on full and volume.
That's all right. I contacted Karen and I didn't hear back, so I figured she could hear. Okay, folks, if you'd like to type in your questions now, there's lots of things to question about. But in the meantime, while you're thinking about that, if anybody does need to contact Michael, of course, he's not the only packaging man about town, but his email is there on the side of that slide, and you've all got a copy of that. So Dylan has put a question in there. So would you read that out, please, Michael?
Yep. Blockchain technology is able to create an ecosystem of producers, suppliers, manufacturers, retailers, consumers, and others, building a safer, smarter, and more sustainable food system for all. Do you know any system in use in Australia? I know 2 that are in development that I can't say about. As far as one that I know of that's being used here in Australia, off the top of my head right now, I can't think of one. I know there is actually one that has been being developed here in Australia, but I know 2 are actually currently in play. And I might have to get back to Dylan on that one, let my brain just absorb that, and I could probably shoot something through to Dylan post this this session. So if I've got Dylan's details, Jen, I can put something through.
Okay, Dylan, if you email me, please, then we'll sort that one out. Yep. So I've got a little link here that I'm posting. If you could click on that, folks, and we'll copy it and give us feedback following the webinar. Okay, we'll just wait a couple of moments for any more questions. I'm sure there'd have to be a heap after that.
I thought, look, I sort of rattled through a fair bit there, but as I mentioned on the presentation, what I've made sure is I've put a lot of hyperlinks across the board. So certainly when there's a snippet or a reference of something, that feel free for, and it takes interest in particular to just click on the hyperlink, or again, you've got my details there. You can shoot through an email as well. I'm happy to answer any questions as well on that point after the session.
Yeah, there is so much happening, isn't there, as a result of COVID? Thanks, Sharon, for joining. Sharon said lots of food for thought. Excellent presentation.
There's a fair bit there, and one of the key things, and again, it's each person dialing in is coming with their own I guess, the impact their own business, and each one will have a different. Some I know are actually having the best time of their lives at the moment. So it's quite interesting, the variety of impact that businesses are having locally in particular. So certainly I would be looking at some of the things that I've covered through here in relative to your particular channel and thinking forward, because a lot of these things that have sort of been brought as the new, in particular, especially the online aspects and development channels because of COVID, they are here to stay. They're not going to necessarily regress back. Look, historically, any development of technology doesn't regress back. People don't go off and buy start a streaming service, then go out and pull their old VHS or beta systems again. Once it goes, it's one-way direction and one-way traffic. So if you're a brand that doesn't really engage in an online platform or channel, that's one area that probably needs a bit of focus and development.
Okay, there's a couple of extra things just popped up.
Yeah, so phasing out, so Julie's put where phasing out single-use plastic versus COVID needs for hygiene creates just position, and that was the point before, and we're certainly finding, and I think I did mention that the refill in particular is one that's going to be a bit challenging in the short term. But if anything, it has stress tested that. One good example, and we spoke about this with the FSNZ guys, when it came to over-the-counter service and deli, they got a lot of single-use plastic islands for takeaway containers. So they basically shut that entirely down during COVID, and everything was pre-packaged. And even now, when they've gone back before the most recent stages, they've returned. Before that lockdown, 100 days of no COVID activity, they still weren't fully returning back to over-the-counter supply. So there was the lingering element of that, and also going back and, if anything, fast-tracking discussions about finding more reusable options to take that out of play. So you're right, there is that lingering aspect, and I think it's going to be, each sector is going to cater for it a little bit differently. But the key thing about the reusables really comes down to sanitisation. So if you look at Loop as an example, they have Ecolab as their partner. So they have medical grade sanitisation levels. So again, it starts to elevate the bar and expectation for us as consumers about what they do with sanitisation. So I want to see how they're sanitising it. I want to know their methodology. Is it medical grade? And those are sort of things that I will now demand of a brand that might be playing that particular space. So it's just gotten harder. It's raised that bar. That's fine, because that bar probably should have been there already, and it may have taken 3 or 4 years to get there. But because of this, it'll bring that forward. So the quality of what we'll be getting out there for the players that are still around will be ones that we should have and actually brought forward by 5 years.
Okay, so one more there from Ian. I'll read out the first bit. He said, that was very impressive, Michael. Material that I think is relevant to a number of areas across dairy businesses. It will be interesting to see how all this plays out, particularly in the packaging space. Do you have a feel for how successful Loop has been overseas?
Look, good question. It's still early days. I think the benefit Loop have had, they've got a lot of support from Alan MacArthur Foundation and a lot of the global CPG players, because it fits in nicely with their, I guess, their external rhetoric and strategy about their good citizens and aiming towards 2025 goals. So I think that's nicely aligned. The metrics, I have been asking a few questions about the metrics in the background. I know from an investment play point of view, it's quite an investment from a tooling perspective to get in. You're talking, $250,000 to $500,000 for tooling investment, for instance, for some of the reusable formats and structures. So it is something that you have to have as a regular return element to make those numbers coming back. The LCA side as well, the reports have been done internally by the group. I think on the slide I put on there, I did put an asterisk that it was their own research, and it was claimed after 3 or 4 uses that it basically is a net improvement on the environmental play. I would say it's probably more than that. 30 is simply the magic number, and there is evidence through even like Return R that it can go forward to 10,000 uses. So it's still rolling forward. Certainly the uptake, people coming on board, has been successful. The question would be, really I'd say probably better ask in about 6 months' time, when it's been almost a full year, when it's been out in the marketplace, especially in New York sector as well. But certainly there are many that are clamoring on there. The Rubbermaid is another example where recently they've partnered up with TerraCycle, who are the founders of Loop. And they've essentially opened up a whole model where they're taking back all of any storage containers, even their competitors' brands, where they're using that as a base material source to produce new products. So the spin-off from that whole model is far-reaching, and certainly Loop is a great PR vehicle as a starter, and especially for circularity. And I think give it another 6 months in, and we'll have some better metrics around that one.
Fantastic. So with that, we better close off this webinar. Thank you folks for participating, but thank you most of all to you, Michael, for all the hard work you've put into this presentation. And we look forward to another presentation sometime in the future.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate it.